The fundamental problem is that the testing system that we use in the statutory programme is not fit for purpose to identify infected and infectious cows in these large populations. And it's a mathematical problem as well as a biological problem. So if we test 1,000 cows and find 10 infected ones, we've probably left 10 behind. And if those 10 infect 10 more around them, by the time we come to test again, we take out another 10, but we still leave 10 behind. Not the same 10, but that's what happens, and the disease persists. If we get it absolutely wrong, the 10 that we've left behind infect 20 more. And so we get an expanding problem. If we get it right, which is what we're trying to do, the 10 that left behind only infect 5. We take 7 of them, and you can see where I'm coming from. We gradually grind the infection out. Now, to find more of those infected cattle, we have to use different tests. Now, legally, we can use gamma interferon, and that's what we've been doing in our persistently infected herds in the southwest now for a few years, and it has made a big difference. That has definitely reduced the number of reactors and the number of infected herds.
Just for people who are listening, what does that test entail?
We have 2 statutory tests. One is the comparative skin test. This is the one that most farmers will be familiar with, that injects some tuberculin to 2 areas on the neck. We are only one of 3 countries in Europe that uses this test to control TB. All the others basically have rejected it as not being fit for purpose. But anyway, we persist with it. Go and ask the minister why. We back that up in the problem herds by taking a blood sample from cows and doing a very similar test but in a sample tube, and it's called gamma interferon. Both these tests are looking for the cow's immune response to the presence of the organism on the basis that if the organism is there, the cow raises what is called a cell-mediated immune response. We now know that not all cows raise that immune response. So it's not a fault of the test. It's the cell-mediated immunity is not there for us to find. But we can use alternative tests that look for other immune mediators. And we can even use a test that looks for the presence of the organism. So we could use a whole suite of tests. And that's what we've been doing on these farms, and finding this undisclosed reservoir of infected cattle that are left behind. Then we find that a significant proportion, about 20% of these undisclosed infected cattle, are shedding the organism, excreting it in their dung. And this causes an environmental problem. And so the cycle goes on. There's a higher proportion of dairy herds problematic with TB than beef herds, even when you compare sizes and locations and whatever. It's a dairy herd problem. But in the beef sector, in suckler herds in particular, it has its own epidemiological issues, its own ways of spreading. And what we're seeing is spreading from mother to calf. And this is because in beef herds, baby calves suck their mothers for 9 months before they're weaned, and that is probably the cause of the spread. And we can see through using these additional tests, we can track the infection through generations of calves. And this is a problem, but it's not insolvable. We can deal with it. But it's something that we need to recognise and cope with.
So are you saying that at the very heart of this issue is, number one, the testing, and that needs to be overhauled immediately?
I have never cured a cow by testing it. The testing gives us the information to allow us to manage the disease. What it does is tells us which cows are likely to be at risk of spreading the disease. And we need good tests to do that. We could make guesswork. We could use tests. We could wave a finger in the air. But the best that we've got is a suite of tests. Very few cows will give a positive result to all the tests. They go through phases of being positive for one test, negative to another. And then when you test them again in 3 months, they're positive to another test, negative to another. And this is the normal dynamics of TB. That's how it works. It's a very clever organism that manages to hide within the cow's own immune system. So latency is its characteristic. We have found calves, baby calves, that are infected at 5 days old, but they don't show as reactors until they're 2 or 3 years old. During that period, between infection and becoming reactors for the statutory tests, they're infected, but they're in latency. They're dormant. They're a hidden time bomb within that herd.
But what is the solution then? Because at the moment in Northern Ireland, that testing is the start of a downward spiral whenever it comes to being positive for TB for farmers here in Northern Ireland. That is a matter of a herd being open or closed, going to slaughter, losing calves, everything. Testing is the very first step in what is a very long road for a farmer. So where do we go? If you're saying these tests don't really work, you can do a whole suite of tests, they may show up as being dormant for 2 years. It sounds like there is no solution to this.
There is a solution, but as I explained to your minister this morning, it's very expensive, and not only in terms of money, but in livelihoods and dead cows. So technically, you could probably go and find all the infected cows in the province over the next year and slaughter them all. But you'd be gobsmacked as to what financial impact that would have on the industry. It's really a non-starter. What we're doing in our own herds is taking a pragmatic view and managing the disease out of the herd. For those dairy farmers that are familiar with how we manage Johne's disease in their herds, we do exactly the same with tuberculosis. We identify the high-risk cows, we can segregate them or minimise the transmission from them. So they will exit the herd in the normal process of culling at the end of their productive life. As long as they don't spread the disease within that herd during their life, they're of no issue to us. So it goes back to what I said at the beginning. We call it the R0, those COVID has told us all about R0, the disease reproduction value. So as long as that infected animal, on average, infects less than one animal around it, the disease will exit, it will go out. And that's the approach that we're taking. In some herds that we've looked at, a small, beautiful pedigree beef herd, we have found most of the herd are infected. And really, the idea of managing it out is a non-starter. We've just got to scrap them and start again. It takes the badger issue out of the equation because this farmer back in 2015 spent several tens of thousands of pounds building 7 kilometres of badger-proof fence around his farm to keep the TB out. Unfortunately, what he did was lock the TB in because it came in with the cows that he purchased and stocked the farm after he'd built the fence, and it's been there ever since. And it has been circulating amongst the cattle.
You brought up the B word. You brought up badgers, and this is the thing that's always the stumbling block and the argument and the debate whenever it comes to bovine TB. So where do you stand on this? You've been doing lots of experiments with regards to TB on your experimental farm. We went for a cull here. It was stopped in the courts. We're back to the drawing board again. Do you think that TB is coming from badgers?
Personally, I think they are a massively over-exaggerated part of this problem. As I've said, we've been killing them robustly for the past 5 years. We've seen a reduction in the number of reactors that we've got in the county. We've seen the reduction in the number of farms that are infected, but that's probably mostly due to more robust testing and the use of gamma interferon. We've still got a lot of TB, far more than you've got here, 15% prevalence at the moment, and that's after killing badgers for 5 years. So I don't know, but what I do know is that if they do play a part at all, it's very minor, and killing them is very difficult and doesn't give the results that you'd like to think it would. And they are a diversion from the realities. I didn't realise I was walking into a bit of a firestorm here with talks of reducing compensation, culling or not to cull. You know, these are, I know they're hugely important issues to your minister. He's having sleepless nights over them, but they are not important in the scale of things of how to deal with this disease. We should park all that lot. You know, compensation values should not be part of this debate. As I tried to explain to your minister this morning, you cannot do this job on the cheap. You have to invest in health. You have to put the money out there, help those farmers through this problem, even because the cost of dealing with this disease is high, not only in the testing cost, the compensation cost, but the consequential losses. We've got dairy farmers that have lost a third of their herd through 2 rounds of gamma testing. Now, that takes a lot of sticking. You might get compensation for the cows that have been lost, but you don't get any compensation for the milk check that is missing for the next 3 months. To take a fresh-calved cow out of production costs that farmer around £4,000. He'll get 1,500 quid for it in compensation. Those are the sort of things that we need to talk about and how to avoid. And on my system, we don't need to do that so much because we can manage this disease out of the herd over a targeted period. How long,
whenever you talk about managing the infection out of the herd, how long does that take?
I quote our farmers 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, depending on how robust they want to be and how deep their pockets are. But 3 years, but that in the scale of things, you know, that's not a great issue. You'll find a lot of your herds, if it's anything like in Devon, they'll be under restriction for 2 years, go clear for a year, and they bounce back. We call them recurrent herds. Most of our herds now are recurrent herds. They never were clear. You know, they got a year off because they didn't get any reactors, but they still had infected cattle in them. So we would like to think that we will get them clear and out within 3 years.
What about your stance on slurry spreading in fields? We gather our slurry, it remains in tanks for most of the winter, and then we have to put it out on the fields. You're talking about shedding, the shedding of the disease. Do you think that leads to more TB?
I think slurry spreading is a risk, but it's a fairly minor risk. The most likely risk you've got is in housed cattle, that cows are not designed to eat faeces. They're supposed to eat fresh food. In my younger days, I used to walk across cow fields and there'd be cow pats with big grass growth around the cow pats. That wasn't just the fertilisation from the cow pat, is that the cows will not eat grass that is growing through cow pats because they know that this is not healthy. We've created farming systems unwittingly, not intentionally, that actually risk the spread of disease through fecal transmission. We see this with Johne's disease. It used to be a sporadic problem. Now, 10 years ago, it's suddenly increased in prevalence, mainly because of fecal contamination of foodstuffs, particularly calf feed. So one of our key risk programs so when we engage farmers in a TB management program, we look at all the potential risks of transmission, including fecal spread by eating feces. So food contamination. I mentioned this morning at the meeting, how many farmers do you see walk out of their cubicle shed through the diagonal feeders and then tread on the food? On our farms now, you'd get sacked if you're seen doing that. The vets get thrown off the farm if they're seen doing that, coming out of a cubicle shed via the diagonal feeder, contaminating that food stuff, because that cow will then some cow will come along and eat that. contamination of water troughs, all these sort of things. The slurry might be an issue, but I think, again, it's down the list. Direct orofecal transmission in cow sheds, I think, is a major problem, and something that is generally fairly easy solvable.
Do you think that governments are putting this issue far enough up their agenda?
Try and convince me that it's high up on their agenda, but then when you start talking the solutions, their eyes glaze over. It's too difficult. I speak to ministers and politicians, and basically they've got no science training, no farming training, no veterinary training. They don't understand how disease works. And when we start talking about shedders, super spreaders, talking about R0 values, their eyes glaze over. It's too difficult. They want diametrically opposed arguments. Shall we kill the badgers or shan't we? Shall we pay more compensation or shall we pay less? These are the sort of trivia that they're dealing with that they turn into big issues. No, the big issue is, can we create farming systems that are better for an improved disease and health of cows against farming systems that promote disease and poor health? So I'd like to see the money put into better farming systems, a bit of help in improving cow housing, improving feeding systems, improving slurry management. That's where we should, and we all win. And in fact, I've just come back from France, in Brittany, well worth a trip to see how they're coping with the environmental challenges, often without any government help, but basically confronting the issues of waste management, slurry management, urine, and dealing with it and turning it into a positive. Most of them have got digesters. They're pumping methane gas straight into the gas network, getting paid well for it. The cows are comfortable. They're on grooved rubber bedding, grooved rubber flooring, water beds, which have water circulating through them. They're harvesting the heat that the cows generate on the water beds to create hot water for the house and for the milking parlours. These are integrated systems. Where's our government with all this? We're still 10 years behind.
Yeah, it sounds though all the systems you're talking about, as it's money talks, isn't it? And I'm beginning to wonder, is farming going to be becoming a practice for the rich?
What we did notice with the French farmers is that they're getting paid well for their product, and they're reinvesting that in the health, welfare and productivity of their cows. They're not living on yachts in the Bahamas. They're not frivolously spending it on things that they don't need. They are investing in health. And we've got to get to that sort of position. Now, if our punters only want to pay 60 pence for a pint of milk, then if they're not prepared to pay, then governments should be asked to. But I think every penny that is spent should be spent on promoting better health and productivity rather than to the detriment of health and productivity.